Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. I had to get married. That's an unsubstantiated statement, isn't it? I guess it takes two to tango, so I had to say that Maddie and I had to get married, because otherwise it would have been a little lonely for me to stand there alone. But even this unfounded statement is only a half truth, because if we hadn't wanted to anyway, then this simply wouldn't have happened. James, Maddie, my steady girlfriend for the past 12 months or so, spoke up one beautiful Friday night. I have some news for you. Good news or bad news? I smiled back, looking at my blonde, slender, and rather gorgeous soulmate, 167 centimeters tall. I'm not sure, James, Maddie chuckled a little nervously. Maybe so, and so it depends on you. You don't need to talk about the rest of the conversation to show what it led to. Suffice it to say that a few moments later we were in each other's arms, professing our love for each other and trying to decide when I would turn my newly pregnant girlfriend into my newly pregnant wife. At any time convenient for your family, Maddie offered. I don't have any family left after Aunt Beth died, and there's no one in Leicester I'm particularly friendly with. It was true. Maybe sad, but true. Poor Maddie lost both her parents in a motorcycle accident as a child, and after several years of being raised in foster care, she was eventually taken in by Aunt Beth, a longtime friend of Maddie's late mother who lived near Leeds. Poor Aunt Beth passed away just a few weeks ago before I could meet her. I was in Canada on business when she died, and by the time I got back, Maddie was already in Leeds for the funeral and everything was done and buried. In the truest sense of the word. What about Beth's son, Maddie? I asked with some reluctance because on previous occasions when it came to him, she cut the conversation short. You were close to Tom once, weren't you? Wouldn't you like him to be present that day? Tom is in jail, James, Maddie snapped, sounding annoyed. I've told you before. I don't want to talk about him. Oops, I shouldn't have mentioned Tom. I knew that he was serving his sentence at the behest of Her Majesty, but I did not know why or where. It's a sensitive topic. It's better to change the subject quickly. My parents are both retired, so I think any date will suit them. The sooner the better, James. My future wife smiled, stroking her flat tummy, and her anger was forgotten. Let's call them right now. And so it happened. Just 4 weeks later, we tied the knot at the registry office in Bedford, where we lived in the presence of a small group of my relatives and our mutual friends. We went to the West Indies, where we had a wonderful honeymoon. But it was still a few weeks after returning when Maddie's tummy began to show signs of the birth of our first child. Beth, that's what we called a little ball of joy, which in the end came screaming into the world with a full set of fingers and toes, as well as a pair of lungs that promised a lot of sleepless nights. My mom's name was too long and went out of fashion, so our daughter was named after the woman Maddie considered her mother. I thought it was appropriate, and Maddie loved me for it. Married life was wonderful, and although I'm not saying that we never had disagreements, Maddie and I settled in well with our wonderful little daughter. When Beth began to grow up, she really became blonde, and in her hair with the right lighting, even a shade of red appeared. Unlike me with a swarthy complexion and completely black hair, Maddie was rather a dirty blonde. Dirty blonde is a symbiosis of light with gray, brown, or other dark shades, so Beth took an example from her mother's side. However, little Beth had more of my disposition. She rarely got upset or even cried, unlike Maddie, who was always prone to excessive emotionality. A good mix, one might say, the best of both sides. Although, of course, I have never been brave enough to say such a thing to my dear wife. We had been married for almost 4 years, and Beth had already turned 3, when suddenly everything in the Dawson family was not all right. Beth was moderately happy, and I was more than happy with life. But Maddie clearly had something on her mind. She quit her job shortly before Beth was born, and since I was making good money, she never came back. By then, we were living in a pretty little village north of Bedford, and 2 or 3 times a week, Maddie would take Beth to Bedford to do some shopping, take her to the clinic, or just meet friends she used to work with. And when I was around, we sometimes met for lunch, which was nice. But lately, she had been returning home in a very thoughtful mood after trips to the city, and something was clearly bothering her. In the first few weeks when we started dating, after we were introduced by a mutual friend, Maddie had periods of moody mood. Obviously, this was caused by her concern that we had a serious relationship pretty quickly, but she had long since put it out of her mind. Of course, I asked what the problem was, but all I got was a good old-fashioned shake of the head. I considered the possibility that she was having an affair with some guy, but Beth was always with her, so it didn't seem even a remote possibility. As it turned out, I was right in this assumption, but perhaps it would have been better if that had been the case. "What the hell happened, Maddie?" I demanded eventually, more forcefully when she was really depressed. She looked up at me and just looked at me sadly for a while before she spoke. "I think I owe you an explanation, James. You're going to find out soon anyway, so I could get this over with." "Find out what?" I asked, and her words filled me with horror. Was she ill? Was there something wrong with our beautiful daughter? "Put Beth to bed, honey," she suggested with a sigh. "Then come down and we'll talk." Good. I wrapped baby Beth up and carried her upstairs, glad that she was so sleepy and didn't insist that I stay to read her a story. I wanted to go back downstairs and find out what the problem was. If I had known at that moment, I would have stayed with Beth longer. Damn it. If I had known what was going to happen, I probably would never have left her bedroom. "Come and sit here, James," Maddie told me, pointing to a chair on the opposite side of the table where she was sitting, and not next to her, which was not an encouraging sign. "James, honey," she began, taking a deep breath before continuing. "You've asked about Tom a few times, and I've never told you anything, have I?" "No," I agreed. "You always cut me off." "Well, it's time to tell you about Tom," Maddie continued in no more than a whisper. "Tom is a couple of years older than me, and when I was younger, he was like an older brother to me after I moved in with him and his mother." "It sounds pretty normal," I put in to cheer her up. "Yes, but when we got older, everything changed, James," Maddie continued, avoiding my gaze. "We weren't really related. We became, well, like a guy and a girl." I just nodded, wondering where this conversation was heading, and suspecting that I wouldn't like it. Then, when we moved into adolescence, we became something more, much more. "What did his mother say about it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even and trying not to get too hung up on what much more might mean. She was all for it. Tom was a bit of a wild boy, just like his father before he died on a motorcycle. I've never told you, but the reason my parents and Tom were so friendly was because they were all bikers, Hell's Angels and others. "Hell's Angels?" I exclaimed, completely taken aback. "Yes," Maddie replied. "All four of them. But after all, your parents also died in a bike accident, didn't they?" "Yes, they died," Maddie admitted sadly. "They were traveling in a large group to Brighton for a week when they turned a corner too fast and wrote themselves off." "And Tom's dad?" I asked cautiously, already knowing the details of the death of her parents, but surprised to hear that this was not all. "It happened just 4 months later, when he was on his way to work. He was hit by a truck, and Aunt Beth lost her husband and 2 best friends in such a short period of time that she never got on a bike again. She began to hate these things. Well, that's understandable," I sympathized, having never liked these things myself. In my understanding, everything that rode on roads on 2 wheels was either a bicycle if it didn't have an engine, or the front or rear half of the car if it did. "Then Aunt Beth took me in and raised me as her own daughter," Maddie continued. "But she was in favor of Tom and you being together?" "Yes, it is," Maddie continued, and her whole demeanor indicated that she was half back in those days. "As I said before, Tom was really wild, desperately fond of motorcycles and rode them without any fear, just like his father. Beth hated the thought of what could happen to him, and I guess she thought I could be a good influence on him." "And you did?" "I don't think so," Maddie sighed. "In fact, it was the other way around, and in the end I became as wild as Tom. We were part of a motorcycle gang, and we were doing stuff we shouldn't have been doing. Quite a lot of things that should not have been done by law." "You mean speeding?" I asked. "Yes, of course, but also many other things. We all had a well-known reputation in the local police." "Is that how Tom was imprisoned?" I suggested out loud, still trying to realize that my dear sweet young wife had once been a biker. At least it could explain the tattoo on her ass, which she never wanted to explain. Maddie didn't answer right away, but just sat there looking like she was gathering her strength to tell me something. "Sort of," she finally muttered, and I waited for her to continue. "One evening we were racing with a bike club and were returning from Manchester when we stopped to meet another group we knew. Tom was driving his new Honda with me in the back, and I was desperately begging him to give me a try. I didn't actually have a full license to drive a motorcycle, although I rode a less powerful Suzuki that he had before, but I had never tried anything as heavy and powerful as his new bike, so it wasn't tuned. This upset me, and like a fool, I started flirting with another biker named Mike, who rode with another group. I knew that he always liked me, and I tried his strength several times. Since I'm being honest, I admit that he and I had a bit of history when Tom wasn't around. Of course, we never went too far with him, but several times we went beyond a simple kiss. "I can't believe what I'm hearing, Maddie," I gasped. It seemed almost impossible to me that the mother of my child could behave in such a way. "It was all a few years ago, James," she replied with a contrite look. "I'm a few years older and a lot wiser than I was then, honey. Are you sure you want me to continue?" "Yes, go on, Maddie," I told her. "That was before I knew you. I must admit I'm surprised by all this, but it doesn't affect how I feel about you in any way." My wife let out another heavy sigh and smiled sadly at me, but otherwise remained silent, and I again had to gesture for her to continue the story. Tom, God bless him, became very jealous of the way I was behaving, and both groups began to feud with each other a little. There was going to be trouble, but I, a stupid little cow, just kept enjoying the fuss I had created. Eventually, Tom came over and tried to pull me away from Mike, but I wouldn't budge. I told Mike that Tom was being rude to me and wouldn't let me ride his Honda, and that he should let me try his Kawasaki. There was no chance because Mike's bike was even more powerful than the Honda, but he played along with me. "Did he let you ride him?" "No. They told me there was no chance, but he wanted me to get behind him and take a ride. 2 or 3 of their friends were kind of pulling at both of them, but at the same time trying to calm them down. But then Mike went even further and said that if I undressed topless and rode with him behind my back, then after that he would let me try on the way back." "Topless?" I exclaimed incredulously. "Why would that idiot think you'd do that?" "Because I did it before James. Several times," she shook me. "Of course, only in the back with Tom, but a couple of times at a bike rally I drove around completely naked. In that party, it wasn't something exceptional, and quite a few girls did it, showing off everything they had." "It's hard for me to accept all this, Maddie," I told her, shaking my head as my stomach did somersaults. "It doesn't look like the girl I met and married. I've already told you, James, I'm older and wiser now, but at that time it was... Well, is it fun?" I finished for her, to which she nodded and continued, trying to keep a pale smile on her face. Tom didn't react until I took off my leather jacket and t-shirt and reached behind me to unbutton my bra. Then he grabbed me and screamed that if that's what it takes, then I can drive his damn Honda. "Would you take off your bra?" I asked with some disbelief. I was shocked by her revelations, but I have to admit that I was more excited by her antics than riding a bike, and in my imagination there was a picture of Maddie undressing like that. Well, it had a certain effect on me. You know what I mean, don't you? "Yes," she replied simply. "And would you bare your breasts in front of them? And would you have gone with him?" "I'm not sure, but it's possible, but I was hoping Tom would give up first." "Jesus, Maddie," I muttered. "You were a real bitch back then, weren't you?" "I probably was," she replied calmly. "But you have to understand that in such a party, guys are kings, and girls are treated almost like property, if not in private, then in public. When a girl got a chance to get the better of one of the guys, it was a real thrill. I guess that's one of the reasons why there were so many fights over women." "So he let you try the Honda?" I asked, although, to tell the truth, I was more interested in whether she went ahead and took off her bra at that moment. However, this soon changed. "Yes," she continued. "I put my jacket back on, kissed Mike on the cheek to annoy Tom, and then went with him to his Honda. He was very angry with me, but he kept his word, and a few minutes later I was slowly driving around the parking lot with Tom in the back seat. I liked it, and by that time I think even Tom was okay with it because I was good at it. And then everything went downhill." "What happened?" I asked impatiently. "I think I pissed Mike off, and he followed me in his Kawasaki and started cutting me off. Tom started getting angry and told me to stop, but of course I knew better and drove faster. Then Mike pulled out of the parking lot and roared down the road, and even though Tom was yelling at me, I ran after him. At that moment, I couldn't help but notice that there were tears in Maddie's eyes, and it seemed like she was about to burst into tears. I moved closer and hugged her, urging her to take her time, but she shook her head and continued, sobbing as she finished her story. Mike was driving faster and faster, and like an idiot I chased after him. It was exciting, and I ignored Tom's screams, who asked me to stop and continued. At that moment, Maddie burst into tears, sobbing so pitifully that I couldn't understand what she was saying to me, and it took several more minutes before she could finish her story. By that time, I had already guessed that everything would not end very happily, and I was not mistaken. Mike slowed down and rode next to us, encouraging me to go faster and faster, and Tom went crazy, pounding me on the back to slow down. But I didn't do it. I was trying to outrun Mike, but it didn't work out for me. I lost control. "What's wrong, Maddie?" I asked softly, hugging her as she cried loudly, remembering the obviously terrible experience. The Honda slipped out from under me and crashed into Mike's bike. I don't remember what happened next, and the next thing I remember is that sometime later I woke up in the hospital, being in some kind of coma. I had a pretty bad bump on my head, but fortunately for Tom, he was more or less unharmed. "And this Mike?" I demanded. "What happened to him, Maddie?" "Dead." "Dead?" "Yes, he's dead." "Shit! That's right." "But then what happened, dear?" "I don't understand. You were riding a bike and Tom was just a passenger. How did he end up in prison?" "He took all the blame on himself, James," she sobbed. When I came to my senses and was able to realize what was happening around me, it was already too late. Tom told the police that he was the one in the front seat and took all the blame on himself. "But it wasn't him, Maddie," I protested. "It was you." "I know. But why would he do that, dear?" I was looking for an explanation. "Why did he take the blame?" "Because he loved me," she replied simply. "I was his woman and he wanted to protect me." Shit. Exactly. By that time we were fed up and neither of us wanted to talk about it any further. So we snuggled up to each other on the couch and were silent for what seemed like an awfully long time. Eventually I realized that there was something else in this story, and I had to find out everything. "What else do you want to tell me, Maddie?" I finally asked. "There must be more to Tom's actions than you've told me so far." "You're right, of course," Maddie admitted. "At that time, believe it or not, Tom had a clean record with the police. He was stopped several times, issued fines for speeding and so on, but nothing more. After the accident, apparently Mike didn't look too bad, so Tom didn't think anything serious would come of it, and told the police that he was in the driver's seat. Unlike Tom, I had a couple of criminal records and he was afraid that I would be prosecuted, so deciding that it wasn't that serious, he took the blame on himself." "Did you have 2 criminal records?" I stammered, wondering what other revelations awaited me. "Jesus, Maddie, were you a criminal?" "Not really, James." Maddie smiled guiltily. "I've already told you about the things I've done. They were both for indecent exposure." "What?" "Riding naked on a bike around the campsite is one thing, but the cops didn't like that we were doing it in the city center." "Twice?" I asked. "More than twice," Maddie whispered. "I was caught 3 times, but the first time they let me go. I didn't know if I could take it anymore, but she went on to explain how Mike suddenly got worse and passed away unexpectedly, and Tom stuck to his story to protect Maddie. When the case came to court, his case was lost, and as a result, he received an unexpectedly long sentence." "You seem to owe a lot to Tom, Maddie," I sighed when she stopped. "When is he supposed to leave?" "That's the problem, James. He still has a few years left, but I just found out that he got an early release for good behavior and will be released soon." "When?" "On Thursday." She surprised me. "The day after tomorrow. That's why I've been upset the last couple of weeks. God, what a mess." I put my head in my hands and thought for a while. Maddie really owed this guy a lot, and as much as I doubted it, I knew I couldn't just ask her to leave him after what he'd done for her. I didn't like it one bit, but she was my wife. I loved her, and I knew what needed to be done. Poor bastard. While he was in prison for something he didn't even commit, his mother died and his girlfriend married someone else. "I guess he has nowhere to go when he gets out, doesn't he?" I asked, silently praying that my guess was wrong. "Not really," she disappointed me. "His mom's house was just rented and he lost touch with his old friends in Leeds." Wait a minute, I was missing something here. "How do you know that, Maddie?" I asked her. "How do you know so much about him if he's in prison somewhere in the north?" "He's not in the north, James," Maddie replied so softly that I barely heard her. "He was, but got into some fights there, and he was transferred." "Where to?" I asked, already knowing what the answer would be even before the words left my mouth. "To Bedford," she murmured. "Right here, to Bedford Prison." "It's a damn coincidence," I said sarcastically. "I'm sorry, James, honey. I know I should have told you a long time ago, but I kept avoiding it. and it was getting harder and harder for me to tell you. I felt trapped and didn't know how to get out of it. So you went to Bedford a lot to visit him? Not all the time, but... She shrugged, but she didn't finish. The tears were still slowly rolling down her cheek as we sat and looked at each other, wondering what to say next. I moved here to be with him, James. I thought it would work out, but I didn't think I'd meet anyone else, honey. I didn't expect to meet you. I just couldn't imagine falling in love with another man. What are we going to do now, Maddie? As I said before, I knew what to do. I didn't even know this guy, but Maddie owed him a lot, and she was my wife. It's time to be generous. Listen, Maddie, I began. I don't like the idea, but I suppose he could come and stay here for a few days. Long enough for him to find a place to live. Perhaps we can help him with a few shillings so he can get started. It won't work, James. Why not? I asked, feeling a little relieved that, to tell the truth, she didn't think it was a good idea. I don't think that would suit him, James. Why the hell not? I bristled, thinking that my offer was damn understanding under the circumstances. He doesn't know about you, James. Doesn't he know? Tom doesn't know I'm married, James. I'm sorry, honey, but I never had the courage to tell him, and he still thinks I'm waiting for him to come out. I've ruined everything, haven't I? Oh shit. That's right. The rest of the evening passed like a nightmare. We walked around each other, trying to figure out what to do in our own brains. When we eventually started talking again, I tried to let her know that next time she would have to tell Tom the truth, because the longer she put it off, the harder it would be to do it. I was very angry at her for such stupidity, especially considering that she was usually such an organized and honest person. But Maddie was my wife. I loved her to distraction, and of course I had to think about our daughter, Beth. Yes, Beth, that's the thing. I realized that Maddie still has strong feelings for Tom, even though I didn't press her on this issue. But Maddie and I had Beth, so I wasn't worried about her long-term commitment. I really wanted to insist that she tell this Tom to fuck off, but deep down I knew that would be a mistake. Maddie had to figure it out on her own, and my job was to help her with that. The next day, the day before his release, Maddie went to visit Tom and tell him the truth. It won't be easy, but it had to be done, and I took the day off to be there when she got home, knowing that she would need my support. I was waiting for her at home, my insides trying to turn inside out, wondering in what condition she would return. Hi, Maddie. I greeted her at the door as she walked down our garden path. How did it go? How did Tom take it? He didn't accept it, she replied, somewhat puzzled for me, slipping past me. I didn't tell him, James, Maddie replied, not looking at me. He was so excited, like it was the best day of his life. I just couldn't do it, James. I just couldn't break his heart when he was so happy. For God's sake, Maddie, I began angrily. Do you think it will be easier for him tomorrow? Do you think he'll be less upset? Grow up, you stupid woman. I'm not going to tell him about this tomorrow, Tom. Maddie hit me. I've made a decision, James, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to give him a couple of days of happiness before I destroy him. It's the least I owe him, James, no matter what it takes. I stood with my mouth open while the meaning of what my wife had said came to me. A couple of days of happiness? I asked anxiously. Yes, James, she replied, finally looking up with a determined expression on her face. I've booked a hotel room in the city for tomorrow night, and I intend to repay Tom for what he did for me. No way in hell, Maddie, I yelled at her. If you think I'm going to stand by while another man satisfies my wife, then you should think again. God, woman, I know you owe him, but this is ridiculous. You can't stop me, James, she screamed back. This is my decision, my body, and I will do what I think is right. I owe him so much, James. Please try to understand. I understand everything. You're going to let another man satisfy you. That's not going to happen, Maddie. It's just not going to happen. I've made my decision, James. No way, damn it, Maddie. I'll do it, James, honey. Please, why can't you understand? Then I might not be here when you get home, Maddie, I threatened. If you let him satisfy you just once, our marriage will be ruined. I was hoping you'd be more understanding, James, she begged me. You know the situation I'm in, and I have to do it. Please, James, please try to understand. There's nothing to understand here, I exclaimed angrily. Then there's nothing to talk about, she shouted back. Damn you, James, why can't you understand? I'm not taking anything away from you. Damn you. You do this and we're finished. Fuck you, you pathetic bastard, she finished and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind her and leaving me standing in disbelief. And that was it. I tried to talk to her later that evening, But when it became clear that I was in no way going to give in, she just turned me off. I wanted to strangle that stupid cow, and I couldn't believe she couldn't see what she was doing to our relationship. What about Beth? Oh my God, poor Beth, whose life is about to be torn apart. I got up pretty early, slept in the spare bedroom, got Beth up and dressed, and made her breakfast. I wasn't going to stick around and watch Maddie go off to commit adultery. I was planning on taking Beth with me for the whole day so we wouldn't be there. Another day off, but what the hell? See you tomorrow, James, Maddie murmured, kissing and fussing over Beth as I was about to leave. Maybe, maybe not, I muttered in displeasure, pushing her away when she tried to kiss me too. Please don't be like that, James, she almost sobbed. It's going to be okay, honey. I promise you. It's not going to be okay, Maddie. Please change your mind. What happened to Mom? Beth interjected when her mother started crying. She's just stupid, honey, I told her, scooped her up in my arms and stormed away without saying another word. Overall, the day spent with Beth was not so bad. It started with a trip to the zoo in Whipsnade and ended quite predictably, in fast food. I decided that I really should spend more time walking with my daughter, although the prospect of doing it on my own in the future did not really appeal to me. I tried. I really tried to understand how Maddie felt about this problem, and I could understand how hard it was for her. However, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't agree with her actions. Then I tried to put myself in Tom's shoes and found that I was having a hard time here too. The poor guy went to prison for loving a woman, and what did the cow do to him? Damn it, what a mess this is. When will Mom come home, Dad? My little daughter asked when we got home. She's gone out for the night, honey, I told her, trying to sound nonchalant. She'll be back soon. Who did she leave with, Daddy? Just with a friend, I replied, not wanting to expand. Is that Tom? This shocked me because I had never considered the possibility that my daughter might know something about him. How do you know about Tom? I asked nervously. Mom and I visit him, Dad, when we come to Bedford. It's not very good there, but Mom says he can't live with us because the men there say he has to stay where he is. I looked at my little daughter incredulously. What a bitch my loving wife turned out to be behind my back. Not only did she cheat on both Tom and me, she also took our daughter, my daughter, to see the bastard in this damn prison. I began to doubt if I even knew my wife. Mom said Tom's coming out soon, Daddy, Beth continued. It means he won't have to live in that disgusting place anymore, honey, I told her without thinking. Tom is very nice. Will he be able to come and live with us then? I don't think so, Beth, I replied sadly. I just don't think it's possible. That night was terrible, and I just didn't want to put my daughter to bed. It was one of those rare occasions when she had to tell me that she was tired and wanted to sleep. Eventually, she fell asleep in my arms, and I held her in my arms for a while before finally giving up and carrying her to the bedroom, not feeling any pleasure at the thought that I would have to spend the rest of the evening alone. The phone call, of course, did not help. Hi, honey. Maddie greeted me when I reluctantly picked up the phone. What do you want? I replied rudely. Please don't be like that, James, she begged. I'm just calling to make sure you're both okay. Beth's fine, I told her. She's already in bed. What about you, James? Maddie croaked. Are you okay? Has he satisfied you yet? I demanded angrily, ignoring her question. Please, James, has he satisfied you yet? I repeated even louder, interrupting her. James, answer the damn question, okay? I shouted at her. Yes, he's satisfied, Maddie blurted back. He has satisfied me twice already and again when he returns. I hope you fucking liked it, you cheating bitch. Yes, she shouted into the phone. Her temperament was not inferior to mine. Moreover, he has a bigger organ than you, and he knows how to please a woman. This statement was followed by silence as I recoiled from her words, and she seemed to realize exactly what she had said to me. James, darling, she cried desperately after a few moments. I didn't mean to say that, honey. I swear, I do not know how she finished this sentence. My ego flew to hell and back, and my heart broke into small pieces. I slowly and purposefully put the phone back on the stand and stood looking at it with tears in my eyes. Of course, after a few seconds, it started ringing again, but I grabbed the cable and pulled it out of the socket. When my cell phone started beeping a minute or so later, I groped for the off button, couldn't, and threw it against the wall with all my might. He stopped squeaking, shattering into pieces, and I stood in silence, and by that time big tears were already flowing down my cheek. I stood there and sobbed. I cried while my wife was waiting for her lover to come back and serve her. I sobbed as I watched the devastating loneliness engulf me, hating the whole world and almost everything in it. I stood there for maybe an hour or more, half wondering and half hoping that Maddie would show up and things would get better. But that was impossible, and of course she didn't come back. It was only when I thought about my baby Beth that I began to get inspired, realizing that I would have to be brave for her. She was all I had, and it gave me the strength to keep going. I made myself a cup of tea, the solution to all the troubles, and sat thinking about how my life would change. Will I take Maddie back? God, what a question. All my senses told me no, but my heart spoke differently, almost in another language which I hardly understood. The only thing I was sure of was that I had to be strong for Beth. I will fight for her to the last so that she stays with me, no matter what Maddie tries. It seemed to me that for Beth's sake I was even ready to take Maddie back, but who was I kidding? I wanted my Maddie back for my own sake, no matter what she did, but I knew it would never be the same. It's not going to work and it's not going to happen. And I started to feel sick again at the thought of what was about to happen to the poor little sweet girl who was sleeping soundly upstairs, unaware of the mess around her. Damn you, Maddie, why would you do that to people who love you? The next morning, I woke up to something stroking my face. Wake up, Daddy, I heard through my foggy brain. Why didn't you go to sleep last night? Good morning, sweetheart, I greeted her sleepily. I just fell asleep on the couch and forgot to go to bed. Mom's going to think you're stupid when I tell her. I think Mom already thinks I'm a fool, I replied, taking a deep breath as the situation fell heavily on my overloaded shoulders again. Dad took the day off from work to look after you again. Where do you want to go? Can we go to the zoo, please, Daddy? My baby exclaimed joyfully, clapping her hands. But we went there yesterday, dear Bouquet, I pointed out to her. But I want to go again, Daddy, she giggled back. I want to see big elephants and funny monkeys and what are the names of those big ones with a long, funny neck, Dad? Giraffes, honey, I told her. But you saw them all yesterday. How about we go to Old Warden and look at the old airplanes? Are there lions, tigers, and so on? No, Beth, it's not there, I explained to her, looking forward to a trip to the Museum of Old Airplanes, which I hadn't been to for many years, if only to distract myself. But they have a lot of other interesting things. Do they have fast food there, Dad? I explained that probably not, but we would be able to find him on the way home, and that was the end of it. Yes. Half an hour later, we were already on our way back to the zoo. It was a good day, and for a few hours I was able to more or less forget about my problems and enjoy my daughter. Maybe she'll become a veterinarian when she grows up. Everything was fine until we came out of the fast food full of triple burgers and frothy milkshakes, and the clouds started coming down again. How the hell can I screw this up? How can I ruin our marriage and ruin little Beth's life? Maybe Maddie and I can overcome her transgression, and in a few years all the problems with Tom will become a distant memory. Maybe. By the time we got home, baby Beth was ready for bed, so we settled back on the couch, and for the second night in a row I had to carry her sleeping figure upstairs. So far everything was fine, but then I had to wait myself to find out what time Maddie would be back. We hadn't discussed the matter, so I had no idea when she would be coming home. Damn it, we've been yelling at each other ever since she announced her plans. I promised myself that when she returned, I would control myself and try to speak reasonably. Deep down, I understood why she felt she had to do what she did, but she had to understand my point of view. I had serious doubts that we would be able to overcome what I could only regard as her cheating on me, but for Beth's sake, I will try to do my best, but only if she tries hard too. I waited until 9 o'clock, somehow confident that she would be back by that time. Then I waited until 10 and started getting angry again. At 20 minutes past 9, the newly connected phone rang. Hello? James Dawson is listening, I replied cautiously. Are you in a better mood than you were last night, James? The voice on the other end demanded. Not much, Maddie, I replied. When are you coming home? Depends on you, James, she said, instantly reminding me of that fateful day when she first told me she was pregnant with Beth. If I come back in the morning, are you going to talk sense to me instead of yelling at me? Tomorrow morning? I blurted back at her. You were supposed to be back tonight. The plan has changed, James, she announced. Are you going to be rational now or not? I counted to 5 to contain my anger before answering. Have you told him yet? I asked, ignoring her question. Does he know we're married? Yes, James, he knows. So what? All things considered, he took it pretty well, Maddie informed me, as if discussing someone who had been informed that he had been expelled from the village football team. He took it much better than you did. Oh yeah? I replied, trying my best not to yell at her. And where exactly were you two when he took the news so well? There is no answer. And what exactly were you two doing when you told him Maddie's news? I continued. Or have you already finished? Still no response. I'll see you when you get home, Maddie, I announced into the silent phone. Then we'll decide if this is still your house or not. There was a click, and this time Maddie hung up before I did. In the morning, I picked Beth up, made her favorite breakfast, and took her to the dance classes she attended every Saturday morning. There, I arranged with one of the other moms to pick her up and leave her for a while if I didn't make it back in time. Maddie usually picks her up, but she's been gone for a couple of nights, I explained, wondering how long it would be before the truth became known. It's okay, the other mom told me. Beth can stay with us all day if you want to have a little chat with Maddie. Thank you, I replied. I think I managed to smile, but I'm not sure. 15 minutes later, I returned to our house, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw Maddie's car already parked in its usual spot outside. I didn't want it to be like this, but damn it, who cares? Where's Beth? Maddie asked sharply as I closed the door. Where do you think it is? I replied rudely. You didn't do anything stupid, did you, James? She practically blamed me. It depends on whether it's stupid to take her to dance lessons or not. Oh yeah. I'm sorry, I forgot, Maddie muttered sheepishly. Okay, the first round is up to me, but there was a long way to go. Listen, James, she began again. Tom took the whole mess very well and made me realize that I wasn't being very fair to you. If we just sit down and discuss everything, then we both think we can come up with something that will suit all three of us. I suppose you mean all four of them, Maddie, I said. Have you forgotten Beth? Yes, of course, James, Maddie hastened to reply. Of course, I mean all four of them. So the second round is also up to me. I was gaining points, but the future didn't look too bright. I motioned for her to continue. The thing is, James, I really love you and I always will. But now that Tom is back, everything has changed, hasn't it? What do you mean? I don't think I've stopped loving him, James, my wife explained to me. I'm sorry, James, but I love two men. The problem is, I decided to remind her that the other man's organ is bigger than your husband's. James, she cried. I didn't want to say that. I got angry, lost my temper, and honestly, I didn't want to say it. But it's true, isn't it? So what? Maddie sobbed. What does it change? I've never complained about your work, and I never will. Damn right about never, I told her. You never will, because you will no longer have the opportunity to compare us. Please, James, she continued desperately, not giving up. Please at least listen to what Tom and I have come up with. Please listen, James. I shrugged, half agreeing to listen, and she continued in a more confident voice. We, that is, Tom and I, decided that we could come to an agreement among ourselves. I could keep living here with you and Beth so we could be like a little family, and Tom would get an apartment or something nearby. So you can visit him, I suppose? I asked incredulously. Yes, of course, but I'd spend most nights here with you, James. But half the nights with him and his monster organ. It's not a monster, James, and it's not going to be half the nights, Maddie muttered, realizing that things weren't going so well. Do you really think I'm going to agree to this, Maddie? I asked quietly. You get the best of both worlds. Tom gets freedom and a regular supply of pussy, and I become a cuckold who will probably support all of us. I don't think so, she whispered. No, when you put it that way. I'll tell you what, Maddie, I began to suggest. You're going to call Tom right now and tell him to get back to Leeds, and maybe, I repeat, maybe I'll take you back. I don't think that's a very promising offer, James, Maddie replied sadly. It's the best thing I can do, Maddie, I told her firmly. Still not sure I wanted her to do it. I guess I'll have to give up then. Close the door behind you when you leave, okay? I thought that would be the end of it. What about Beth? Asked Maddie. She'll have to live with me and Tom. Over my dead body, Maddie, I replied viciously. I would do anything to prevent this from happening. Let's see, James. Maddie smiled at me. If you think you can keep Beth, then there are surprises waiting for you. Fuck off, Maddie, I hissed at her angrily. Go back to your lover from prison. No court in the world will give you custody while you're with this loser. Maddie didn't say anything else, just got up, walked out and left. Oh yes, she actually slammed the front door, in fact, almost taking it off its hinges. Is the game set and match up for me? I didn't think so. In fact, I had a terrible suspicion that the game had just begun. I didn't hear from them for the next 4 or 5 days. It was like sitting in the trenches during the First World War and waiting for the next salvo or major attack to cover me. I still took the opportunity to go to an appointment with Tim, my friend, who was also my lawyer, only to leave with my absolute confidence that any court in the world would award me custody of Beth, who was a little shaky. 50-50, he advised me sadly. If she can prove that she has a stable relationship, the court may side with her. But he's a damn criminal, I tried to argue. He killed someone, damn it. It wasn't true, of course, but Tim didn't know that. He killed someone in an accident, James, my friend informed me. He paid his price to society and has the same rights as everyone else. What is he like? Doesn't he look a little dubious or something? Is there anything we can use against him? I have no idea, I had to admit. I've never met him. I've never seen him. Maybe you should, James. All this time I was killing Beth with kindness and attention, coming up with various excuses why her beloved mom wasn't by her side. When's Mom coming home, Daddy? What is it? She asked sleepily. Soon, honey, I replied, unable to tell her the truth yet. I miss my mom. Me too, honey, I replied with tears in my eyes, hugging her desperately. And I missed you. Oh my God, I missed that woman. I met with this Tom much more easily and perhaps earlier than I expected, when I received a call from my friend asking me to come to a meeting with other parties, as he put it, and their lawyer. I put on a brave face when I came to the meeting, wondering what this volume really looks like. Come on, biker, Hell's Angel and all that. I expected Tom to turn out to be some greasy, long-haired bum. The tall, neatly trimmed, blonde, somewhat slender and athletic man who appeared in front of me caught me off guard. Hi, James. He greeted me with a nervous smile on his face, holding out his hand to shake. I'm sorry that we had to meet like this. Actually, I'm sorry about the whole damn thing. Oh shit. I really wanted to hate this guy, but I took his hand and shook it. At least I didn't smile too much, and maybe it won't be as difficult as I expected. Oh, how wrong I was. Mr. Dawson, their lawyer, a fat, grinning bastard, began the proceedings. Obviously, your wife is not going to take you back, so there is no point in you going down this path. Tim, my lawyer, reached out to keep me from hitting him and accepted the challenge. I don't think my client is interested in that possibility either, he said. As for us, it's just a matter of resolving the issue of your client's access to her daughter from marriage. Obviously, my client will be the primary caregiver and she will live with him, but he is willing to provide reasonable access to his future ex-wife. It's not that simple, the fat man replied with a smile that could have done credit to a crocodile. My client, that is, my clients have a preferential right to a child. Nonsense, I exclaimed, but Tim ordered me to calm down again. The fact that my client, Mrs. Dawson, is the mother of the child is not disputed, the fat man continued. Do we agree with this? Tim acknowledged this fact by giving me a funny look, just as I was puzzled by what line of behavior the other guy had chosen. Then we also have to admit who the father is, the pederast continued, and this time Tim had to physically restrain me from confronting that asshole. My clients claim that Mr. Dawson is not the father of the child, and the father is her ex-boyfriend, Mr. Thomas Wellings. Tom? Is Tom Beth's father? What the hell is this nonsense? I was so shocked that I just sat there with my mouth open. We have documentary evidence in the form of a medical certificate that Mr. Wellings is 9.9% the father of the child by birth. We also have additional evidence that your client, Mr. Dawson, cannot be the father. What kind of nonsense are you talking about? I shouted at the fat bastard. Beth is my daughter. I was there when she was born and I took her away. Apparently not, Mr. Dawson, the fat man interrupted me. You may have mistaken her for your daughter, but you are not her real father. He is my client, Mr. Wellings. But that's impossible, I protested. He was in jail when Maddie got pregnant. For God's sake, I was there when she was born. It's just not possible. My clients have explained this, Mr. Dawson, he continued in a monotone. Obviously, you were in Canada when Mr. Wellings' mother died, and he was granted compassionate leave from prison to attend her funeral. My client, Mrs. Dawson, Miss Jones at the time, was also present at the funeral, and they... Well, let's just say they had the opportunity to get to know each other again. I felt the room begin to spin as I listened to what he was telling me. I couldn't believe it, but deep down I knew it was possible. I was dark-skinned and, well, kind of stocky. Beth grew up tall, slender, and blonde, just like her father. Oh, shit. As the room spun around me, Maddie burst into tears and ran out of the office. Tom got up to follow her, but paused. "I'm sorry, James," he said to me. "I swear to you, Maddie had no idea you weren't Beth's father until she started growing up and looked like me." "Does that justify her?" I shouted at him. "Does that make it acceptable to make love to you when she was practically engaged to me?" He quietly agreed, shaking his head. "Maddie has no excuse for her behavior, but I love her. I've always loved her, and, oh shit, James. I'm just really sorry." With that, he turned on his heel and followed Maddie out of the office. "Well, Mr. Dawson," the fat lawyer said again, "can we make a deal? I have a busy day today, so maybe we could come to some acceptable terms." Before I could react, Tim jumped to his feet and yelled at the other attorney. "Shut up, you pathetic bastard. One more word and I swear I'll punch your nose into the other side of your face myself." "It's not very professional," the fat man said sarcastically, but he got up, gathered up his papers, and hurriedly left the office. "You'll hear from me again." "I'm sorry, James," sighed my buddy, my personal eagle of jurisprudence, as he left. "I didn't expect that. No, and neither do I. My story doesn't end there, but it might be worth mentioning that the sight of Maddie's back as she ran out of the office was the last time I saw her. If I had known this then, perhaps my actions over the next period of time might have been different, but on reflection, perhaps not. Tim called his secretary and told her to cancel everything for the rest of the day, and despite her protests, he, how should I say it, gathered me up and practically in a daze dragged me to the nearest pub. There the two of us drained the first 3 pints in the time it took to order them, and over the next hour, somewhat mysteriously, 5 or 6 of my best buddies showed up to help me drink myself into oblivion. I don't remember the end of the evening or leaving. I can't remember the next day either because my first coherent thought was the next morning, when I woke up in a strange bed with an equally strange but very attractive female body pressed against me. I still didn't understand what kind of arrangement it was, but if anyone was paying her, it definitely wasn't me. Anyway, the girl disappeared, and I never saw her again. Or maybe I did, but if she hadn't been naked with a rose tattoo on her naughty buttocks, then I just wouldn't have recognized her if she were right in front of me. That's probably what good friends are for. I will not pretend that a black cloud has descended on me and I have withdrawn from the world. I am one of those who believes that his glass is half full, not half empty, and with such a positive attitude, I went to arrange my life. Okay, there was a black cloud, of course, but I tried my best. I met everyone who came my way, pretty or not, but most often I came across women with children, single mothers or divorced. As you can imagine, this made me quite popular, and I quite often received my fair remuneration. But the only one I had feelings for abandoned me when she accused me of needing her only for the sake of her daughter. That's right, I tried perhaps too hard to replace my daughter Beth. I was trying to find a partner who would have a replacement for Beth. Madness? Yes, I know, but that's how it affected me. Eventually, I realized my problem and tried to resolve it. It reduced the number of women I dated, but there's nothing wrong with that. And what about Beth herself, you might reasonably ask? Yes, I insisted on having access to her, despite the fact that there was no blood connection between us. But it was a damn disaster. Maddie and Tom moved back to Leeds, and I had to go there for the weekend to visit her. Neither Maddie nor Tom objected, to be honest with them, and, moreover, did everything to make my trip easier. It was Tom I talked to every time I called, and it was Tom who met me when I came to pick up Beth, and Maddie had perhaps the wisdom not to show up. But it didn't go very well. Poor Beth was just confused and spent the whole day trying to persuade me to come and live with them, not realizing at her tender age how unlikely it was that this would ever happen. She talked and talked about it, unable to come to terms with the fact that Dad no longer loves Mom, and constantly told me how good Daddy Tom was and how happy I would be there. When I brought her back, she started crying, realizing that I was going to leave her, and clung to me, crying her eyes out and throwing a tantrum. In the end, Tom had to pull her away from me and hold her in his arms as I ran out of the house, my tears matching those of poor Beth. It was terrible and broke my heart again, maybe even worse than before. It was the most terrible decision I've ever made in my life, But I swore from that very moment that there would be no more visits. I couldn't put baby Beth through that agony again, and I didn't think I could go through it myself. When I informed Tom of my decision, he tried to convince me, saying that they would do everything possible to make it less traumatic next time. But deep down, we both knew that it had to be better this way. In the end, we agreed that I would give her 6 months so that Beth could settle into her new life, and then we'll see. We agreed to this, but we both knew what it really meant, namely that for her sake, I would no longer appear in her life. Maybe when she grows up, I promised myself. Maybe when she graduates from high school or something. I promised myself a lot of things, but in reality I was completely on my own again, and the memories of my wife and daughter remained only memories. I will be eternally grateful that I was not suicidal. Life went on as it usually does, and my painful memories faded somewhat. Time is said to be a wonderful medicine, but I can assure you that it is not a miracle cure. It needs to be worked on, and I've been working on carving out a new life for myself. When the first Christmas came, I couldn't let it go by without doing something. I went and bought a gift for Beth and sent it, not knowing how to sign it or say who it was from, not wanting to renew an old heartache. I was quite surprised when I received a letter from Leeds a week after Christmas. Yes, Beth wrote me a little thank you letter and told me something about her life. Obviously, one of the adults helped her, and for some reason I was sure that this someone was Tom, and not my ex-wife. I wondered if she even knew that the letter had been sent, but I did not allow myself to dwell on this possibility. In the letter, she called me Daddy James. I know it meant that I was demoted, and that Tom was undoubtedly the dad now, but it actually cheered me up a lot. I was sure that Beth had 2 parents who loved her, and that I had a name that she would probably always remember me by. Daddy James. I continued to send her gifts for every birthday and Christmas, continued to receive thank you letters from her and photos, proudly noting how her handwriting improved over the next couple of years or so. Tom often sent me a little note himself to tell me how well she was doing at school, in dance lessons or somewhere else, but there was not a word about me visiting her again. I guess I had secret hopes that we would meet again soon, but after a year or so, Beth mentioned her younger brother in one of the letters, and I agreed that it was better for me not to insist on my participation. Tom and Maddie had 2 children, and I didn't become part of this family. No wonder my friend Tim's wife had a friend. Well, of course she had a lot of friends, but you know what I mean. Her name was Sally. She was a lawyer, a couple of years younger than me, dark-haired and slender, with the most fantastic pair of legs I've ever seen. The fact that I mention her here at all obviously means that Sally has become something special. Our interests have coincided so much that it seemed as if we were always destined to be together. In the end, I asked a question. We were both divorced, had good jobs, and just loved each other. Oh yeah, making love was pretty damn good too, if you're interested. Oh, James, she replied to me with a big smile on her face. I would love to, but there was one but, an unspoken but undeniable but. What's the matter, Sally? I asked, wondering what the but could be. I know your story, James, she replied softly. You'll want to have children, won't you? Of course, Sally. I grinned back. At least 2, maybe more. But I can't have children, James, she shocked me. That's why my last marriage broke up. My ex desperately wanted to have a son to continue his family line. You never told me about it, I whispered, remembering that her ex, husband David, was some minor baronet or something, which is why a son would be so important. And whose fault was it? Mine, James. We were checked and David was fine, but my eggs weren't exactly what they should be. Not impossible, but unlikely. And he ended your marriage just because of that? I asked in surprise. When I met him, David always seemed like such a nice, reasonable guy. No, it wasn't just that, Sally answered me a little sadly. But it was this little problem that led to quarrels and eventually to our divorce. I'm so sorry, Sally, I had no idea. Couldn't you have adopted a child or something like that? I would have done so, but David's family was categorically against it, and in the end it drove a wedge between us. Sad, I commented. It's very sad, she agreed. But then I wouldn't have met you, would I? So you're going to marry me? I snapped at her. The conversation continued. Sally was worried that she didn't want another marriage to fail for the same reason, and I tried to assure her that I would accept it. We talked about possible adoption or other artificial means, which Sally, with her background, knew much more about than I did. To tell the truth, we really had a lot to think about, None of us were getting any younger. Why don't you ask me again in 3 months? Finally, Sally suggested, when you have time to think about it. How about I leave the question on the table and you give me the answer in 3 months? I objected. Earlier if you want. And that's where we stopped. I wanted her to say yes, but deep down I had to admit that I had my doubts. I really wanted a child of my own. More than one, to be honest. And adoption and everything else left me feeling insecure. Unfortunately, I was so insecure that tiny cracks began to appear in our relationship where they did not exist before, and where they simply should not have been. There was no question of breaking up, and we were still very happy together, but there were doubts, and the issue of marriage slowly faded into the background. They say that every cloud has a silver lining, a saying like, there is no silver lining. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I certainly wasn't thinking about clouds that morning, sitting in my office and wondering how the hell to justify the large expenses for a new project that I was leading. The last thing I wanted was for a phone call to interrupt my train of thought, especially if it had nothing to do with my pet project. Mr. Dawson? An unfamiliar and rather officious voice asked. Mr. James Dawson? That's me, I replied casually, still focused on how to make $250,000 look like pocket money. I have to ask you a few secret questions, Mr. Dawson. Okay, I replied, still a little annoyed at being interrupted. But first of all, who are you? I'm sorry, said a voice that didn't sound at all apologetic. My name is Mrs. Murphy from Headling Social Services. Headling is a suburb of Leeds. I know exactly where Hedving is, Mrs. Murphy, I replied, and my interest suddenly increased tenfold. What can I do for you? Are you Mr. James Edward Dawson? It's me. Were you previously married to Mrs. Madeline Dawson, who later became Mrs. Wellings? Yes, it is, I repeated, a little annoyed by her formality. As a guarantee, could you tell me your ex-wife's middle name? Jin, I replied. Pleased with this, she also asked me about her date of birth, to which, of course, I answered correctly again. What does it all mean? I asked a little more insistently. Hedving Social Services has been tasked with resolving some outstanding issues regarding the late Mrs. Wellings. The late Mrs. Wellings? I asked, immediately realizing that he was talking about Tom's mother. But she died a few years ago, and I've never met this woman. What does this have to do with me? On the contrary, Mr. Dawson, the voice replied. Mrs. Wellings died 6 days ago. She died in a motorcycle accident along with her husband. What? She couldn't do. Them. My voice trailed off as the meaning of her words dawned on me. I almost dropped the phone. I'm sorry, Mr. Dawson, the Social Security woman continued. I thought you should have known. What about Beth? I exclaimed aloud as terrible possibilities flashed through my mind. She's all right, isn't she? Please tell me she's okay. She's pretty upset, sir, continued the woman, who for the first time had the slightest trace of humanity in her voice. She wasn't involved in the accident, but she's obviously very upset. She asked about you, but it took us a few days to find you. Where is she? I shouted into the phone. I'm on my way. I'll come and get her. The woman told me that they had her address, and 5 minutes later I was already sitting in the car and driving out of the parking lot, forgetting about my such an important project. I was nervous as hell sitting in Mrs. Murphy's rather gloomy office and convincing her that I really am who I am and that there is no doubt that I want Beth. To my surprise, I found that Tom and Maddie had done nothing to change anything, and of course I hadn't heard anything about the adoption request. Legally speaking, I was still Beth's father, since that was what it said on her birth certificate. Just imagine. I think I was upset by the news of Maddie and Tom's death, even considering what she had done to me. But I was so excited to see Beth again that such thoughts and feelings simply did not have time to penetrate my soul. But there was something else that I hadn't thought of. Eventually, there was a knock on the door, and another woman entered the room, holding Beth's hand. My Beth. I saw her for the first time in almost 4 years. Daddy, is it really you? Beth asked timidly. No wonder, because despite the fact that I was sent her photos, she hadn't seen me since the age of 4. Yes, it's me, honey, I said, choking on the words, and the first tear flowed down my cheek, and I held out my hands to her. Daddy, Daddy, she screamed, running up to me. I've missed you. I knew you'd come for me. I told you that there was something else that I completely forgot about, and this omission suddenly became apparent when I hugged my daughter. When I tried to pick Beth up in my arms, something was wrong. Looking down, I was surprised to see another toddler clinging to Beth's skirt with all his might. Oh shit, I completely forgot. Beth had a younger brother. This is Jimmy. Beth introduced me as I lowered her back to the ground, not wanting to scare the poor kid into winning the tug of war. Nevertheless, the poor kid looked like he was about to burst into tears. He was about 3 years old or so, and he looked like a real baby. Dark-haired and powerfully built, he looked like a potential future rugby player. He was clearly scared to death, but he held on bravely, not knowing what the future held for him. Hi, Jimmy. I smiled at him encouragingly, but he still looked around uncertainly. This is James's dad, Jimmy, Beth encouraged her younger brother. Say hello. Dad James, who was your real dad? He asked Beth, not taking his eyes off me. Yes, Jimmy, she told him. Mom and Dad always told us how good he was, and now he's going to become our dad and take us to his place. Mrs. Murphy opened her mouth to speak, no doubt wanting to correct this innocent statement since nothing was discussed about Jimmy, but I raised my hand to stop her, and she had the good sense to remain silent. My mom and dad went to heaven, little Jimmy said. Are you really going to be our new dad? How old are you, Jimmy? I asked, looking at the baby, and suddenly an idea came to my mind. Fries, he told me. Free and at that moment he looked at his older sister for help. He's 3 years and 4 months old, Beth finished for him. Well, damn me, I exclaimed when the truth became clear. The math turned out to be not difficult at all. 3 years and 4 months, plus another 9 months, and we ended up in the middle of October. Yes, a month before Tom was released from prison, about 4 years ago. Combined with Jimmy's physique and complexion, I had no doubts. Jimmy was my son. For God's sake, they should have known about it and even named him Jimmy after me. No wonder Maddie wasn't there the only time I went to see them, because by that time the pregnancy should have already appeared. Come and hug your daddy, baby. I grinned, feeling the warmth spreading through me. He hesitated for a moment and jumped into my arms, followed by Beth, and the three of us hugged and cried, not paying attention to those around us. After that, everything went smoothly. I had the legal right to take Beth away, and it took only 10 minutes in the presence of a hastily found judge to get the right to take Jimmy too. Of course, I will have to process the documents later, but I knew one lady, a legal advisor, who I hoped would be happy to help me with this. This is my friend Sally. I introduced my 2 new charges the next day, noticing that her eyes were already clouded. Will you be our new mom? Little Jimmy asked. Hush, Jimmy, Beth said to her brother. Dad said that this woman is his friend. Sally stared at them for a few moments before saying something, and I held my breath. It's okay, Beth, she finally managed to say as tears rolled down her face. If your dad still wants me, then I think you two are the answer to our prayers, and I'd love to be your new mom. The offer was still valid, and the 3 months hadn't expired yet, so you can guess how it ended, right? That day, Sally and I took them both for a walk, held hands, ran together, played together, laughed together, and watched together. Yes, that's right. We went to the damn zoo again. Of course, in the months and years that followed, there were difficult times when my children remembered Tom and Maddie, who were their parents. But time is really a healer, and those times passed when our children grew up, and Sally and I began to grow old happily together. Beth has become a veterinarian, is happily married to a young civil engineer, and we are looking forward to having our first grandchildren. Jimmy joined the Royal Air Force and has just received wings. I wonder if his love of airplanes is caused by the fact that we dragged each other to Old Warden so many times to see the museum there.